In the book Sacred Curiosity, Lee describes an art class she took in college that she credits with helping her cultivate this combined sense of curiosity and spirituality, curiosity and wonder. The final for that art class was to draw the small, dead crayfish that her art instructor had placed on this drop cloth in the middle of the room. But there was a catch. You couldn't use your hands. I got this, she thought. She barreled through the exercise and was ready to turn in her 6-foot-long, bright red portrait of a crayfish that she had painted using her elbows and her feet and her big toe. And she was sure, she was absolutely positive she had aced the challenge. And the professor said, I think you need to try again. She said, I gave it my all. I worked really, really hard on this. And he said, no, you didn't. You can turn it in now if you really want to, but you won't like the grade that you get. There's enough time. It's not due for another 5 days. Try again. Disgruntled, she did. For 2 days, she circled that crawfish. She looked at it from every single angle. She got down close at eye level. She got up on a ladder and looked down. She looked at it from every single perspective. And then suddenly, at the end of day 2, after 48 hours of staring at the small crustacean curled on the drop cloth in the middle of the very cold studio, she had an epiphany. She writes, then and there, woven throughout the tiny armored exoskeleton of the mud bug, I noticed hues of orange and purple, deep blues, and salt flake whites. What was barely detectable anywhere was red. Despite the caricature of a crayfish that I had memorized over the preceding 2 decades of my life.